Here are some of my personal favorites from 2023 that might not have got enough attention from some of our viewers. Here is another video in our large building series. In this video, I will provide you with 2 different ways to build the gable walls. However, the most common is going to be a flat wall, the same height all the way around the perimeter of the building. And that's going to be more for a convenience. It's going to be easier to build than building this over here. And don't forget that your engineered roof trusses are usually a system that is designed with a plan, and that plan will usually have installation instructions or examples, details on how to assemble the roof. And that system might not require a wall like this. So let's go ahead and take a look at the bottom of the foundation. We will not have any additional concrete footings in here. Another plus for a truss roof, plus the fact that they are usually easy to install. And with our balloon framed rake wall here, I will also provide you with 2 different ways to finish off the corners here for the roof rafters. And of course, I will provide you with the most common method, along with something a little more tricky over here where we're going to notch the rafter into the wall framing. And then our lookouts will be sitting in these notches here. And I don't know if this is a method that would be approved by your engineer because we're really cutting a lot out of the framing plate there. And our building is 30 foot by 60 foot with a door over here and a large opening over here for our garage door. And if you notice, I'm also going to provide you with 2 different ways to frame the header here. And I went ahead and used a 4x4 post there. The 4x4 post was part of my original design, thinking that I would need to install hold downs at each end. So I have a 4x4 here and a 4x4 here. And you might need to add more anchor bolts and hold downs to provide additional lateral support for the front wall here. And the other method here would be stopping the header at a king stud. And since the framing plates do not go through, we're going to need to install a strap. And you might want to move the strap over a little bit so that it is not in the way of the roof truss. Next up, let's go ahead and install our roof trusses. We will have a gable roof truss at this end of the building. And don't get confused, you don't need to frame it the same way here. Like I said, you can have a flat wall with a gable truss at each end to make your job a little easier. So we're going to have the top of the gable truss notched for our lookouts, or 2x4s that will be supporting the fascia board. And let's go ahead and take a look at the strap I was talking about. You just want to move it over a little bit so that the roof truss is not sitting on top of it. And this might not be the case all the time. If you have a large strap, then the strap is going to take priority over the roof truss. And our eave blocks here. And our block here for the fascia board. And basically the lookouts are going to provide us with enough structural support because this block will not be providing us with much. And this is another common method for framing with roof trusses. And we will need to install some support backing. These 2x4s will prevent the bottom of the trusses from moving. And in our example here, we will be installing 2 of them, basically spanned about 1/3 of the way. The building is 30 foot wide. And if we divided that by 3, we would have about a 10-foot space between the outside walls and each one of the support braces. And again, your roof truss manufacturing company will provide you with all of the necessary information you need to assemble the roof. And they're going to be the ones who will provide you with any additional information you need that might not be on their plans. Let's go ahead and install the fascia board. You can see here where the lookouts are going to be installed. And let's go ahead and take a quick tour of this for those of you who have not seen any of my videos. And of course, a view of the ridge block here for the fascia board. If you notice, the block in the center is not even at the top or flush with the top. It's down a little bit. The edges of the block will be even or flush with the fascia board and the truss. So make sure that you pay attention to the assembly of these blocks here so that you don't end up with a bump up there in the sheathing. A view of the other side there. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we added this board. We're just simply going to add a board and nail it to the rake wall here. However, when we do that, we're not going to end up with a rafter that will be even with the outside edge of the wall. And this looks kind of funky sometimes, so only use this method here if that's going to be acceptable. And of course the lookouts here will attach to the lower top framing plate and will be notched in between the upper framing plate. And you can always have two top plates that run all the way through and then some blocks like this. That would be acting as a third plate basically. Now let's go ahead and head over to the other side, take a look at how we notched this rafter into the wall framing so that it would be even with the outside edge of the wall. And like I said, this usually becomes a problem when you're looking at the bottom of the eave. So something like this seems to look more normal than the other side of the building, especially to those of you who are in the business. So after we install our roof sheathing, this is what the bottom of it would look like. And of course, since it is a gable roof, it's going to be easier to install the roofing because you're not going to have as many cuts as you would on a hip roof. And of course, here is the detail I'm talking about, where this kind of looks a little goofy. You might have stucco or siding that's going to go up here and create some type of an odd looking corner. And again, if it's not that big of a deal and you need to build a large rake wall instead of using a gable roof truss, then I would say go for it. Use that method. And you might need a block here in the wall to nail the bottom truss cord spacer to. And if you have it up against a wall framing stud, you will be able to attach it to the framing stud and the block, and attach the block to the framing studs on each side. And if you notice, we do not have any drywall backing. You can always attach this to the drywall backing if you're going to be installing drywall in your garage. Front view of the building. Let's go ahead and take a look at the bottom here. And one of the biggest problems you're going to have with this roof is that you won't have the height that you will in our previous examples if you need it. So we have a 7-foot opening, 7 foot off of the floor. And if you're going to be parking large equipment in your garage, this might not work. And you're going to have to forget about this design here. This design right here should work fine for vehicles like a car or a truck and storage, but you're not going to be able to park a large tractor in something like this if that's what you need this garage for. In this video, I will try and provide you with a better connection, or at least in my opinion, it's going to be a better connection for a shear wall that's going to have hold downs that are going to connect through the floor to the building foundation. And I've used this method before, but since I found a better method, I probably will not be using this method again unless it was specifically specified by a structural engineer. Because I would rather connect the 4x4 to the building foundation, so simply lower the hold down and the post instead of having it like this. And one of the problems you're going to have if you do something like this and you use the anchor bolt required by the manufacturer of the hold down will be that it might not be embedded into the concrete far enough if you actually do it this way, which you're not going to. Most people are not going to do something like this because it's not going to meet the manufacturer's requirements. So that what they'll do instead is lower the anchor bolt so that it does meet the manufacturer's installation instructions, and then add a coupler or a coupling to it. However, you will need to check with the manufacturer to make sure that you can use a coupler for something like this. I would imagine with larger hold downs, you might not be able to use a connector. So make sure that you run this by your structural engineer also. Don't just rely on the manufacturer. And yes, I've seen problems created by using couplers on the jobs. So just don't rely on the manufacturer for something like this. Check with the engineer whose name is on the building plans. And again, do not get a verbal okay from this. Make sure that you have something in writing. Otherwise, you are going to be paying for any repairs and not the person who okayed this over the phone. Another thing you might be able to do, and this might be on your building plans as another alternative also, would be to use a longer connector like an all thread that's going to have something like this on the bottom. You might have a nut on the top with a large square washer and another nut on the bottom that can be firmly embedded into the concrete. And again, I got to stress this. This might not be an approved construction method for your project. However, if it is, make sure that you add a block, something like this, in the floor framing to get some additional structural support for the hold down going through the floor framing. Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at the method I like the best. And again, that would be running the 4x4 down to the top of the sill plate that will be sitting directly on top of the building foundation. And with this method here, you're not going to need a coupling or the all thread. And in my opinion, you're going to create a stronger shear wall because now you're not going to be relying on a load transfer through the floor framing. Now keep in mind that something like this is going to be a little more difficult for the framing contractor to build and might require a few more dollars. So it wouldn't be a bad idea to figure out the cost difference between doing something like this on a project that might have a lot of hold downs. Another thing you're going to need to do will be to add a block, and that block should extend a little bit past both sides of the 4x4. And let's go ahead and take away the wall framing plates to give you an idea of what something like this is going to look like before you lay out and frame the walls. And in some situations, even though I've never ran into this, you might need to use both methods. Connect one to the foundation, one to the floor framing in order to avoid a specific problem you're going to run into on your project. Now, another thing that's going to add a few more dollars to your project will be the longer shear panel or the additional amount of shear panel required to extend the shear wall all the way down to the building foundation. Here is another house that I am going to create a playlist for, even though I won't be providing you with anchor bolts for this one, and I won't be putting a lot of detail into the foundation or other parts of the house. If not, I will be using this design in a variety of different videos in the future, and will eventually have all of the videos in one playlist that you can watch for this particular house. And as you notice, no anchor bolts around the perimeter. However, we do have a garage door here and another door that you can go out into the backyard here in the back. And of course, the garage floor slab is sloping about 1/8 of an inch per foot. And here we have the slab extending out a little lower than the footings so that we won't end up with water going into the main building. And of course, our footings, we have larger footings around the perimeter. And since we are going to have load-bearing walls for the floor supporting the joists, we're going to need a footing down the center. However, I won't be putting any additional pads in or making sections of the footings larger in this area to support the stair beam, which will also be supporting a section of the floor. I would think that this should be enough for that. And the footing around the perimeter of the garage. This is a single-story garage. I don't need the large footings that we're going to have for the two-story part. Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at the lower wall framing. And we are going to have a two-car garage here, a laundry room here. Then we're going to have a bathroom, stairway, bedroom, living room, dining room, and a kitchen. And our front door and our back door. And of course, our large garage door here so that we can get the cars in there. And then a window for the bedroom, front door, and then a couple of windows here for the living room in the corner, dining room here. And then we are going to have a closet underneath the stairs. Back door, kitchen window. This window is going to be over the sink. And of course, our back door and a window for the laundry area. And since this is lower here, we're going to need to lower our header over here. And we can also lower the window in the garage. And we're just going to lower the distance that we have here. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this area here where you can see the drop down along with the slab extension going over the doorway. And here's a view of the two headers here, the door and the window, going to be a little bit lower than these three openings here. Next up, let's go ahead and head over to the laundry room and the entrance from the garage into the house. Going to have a washer and a dryer over here, a cabinet, and then a bathroom here with a bathtub. And then our stairwell here. And of course we have a medicine cabinet here. That's always nice to have in a bathroom, even though I don't know if they're a big deal anymore. I like to put them in if I can. And of course our door going underneath the stairway for a closet, additional storage. And then our closet for our bedroom, along with the door going into the bedroom. And we will be building a 2x6 wall here with a window to give us some light into the stairwell. And we could lower the window if the slope of the roof allowed us to. It's not going to allow us to lower it much in this design. And of course our front door, corner windows here. And if you notice, the header on this side's a little bit larger, and that's because the floor and the roof will be sitting on that section of the building. Again, more stuff that I will be going over in future videos. Next up, let's go ahead and throw some floor joist in here. And we're going to be using 14-inch TJIs or truss joist. And the joist will be spaced 16 inches on center. I do not have any of the joists doubled up for walls that are going to be running parallel to them yet, or any plumbing in this design. And here you can see where the blocks are going over the load-bearing wall, even though the joists aren't breaking over the load-bearing wall. This wall here is still being used to break up the span for the joist. And I will be going over more of that later. And our stairwell here along with our beam. And I've positioned the beam in a way to where we can use it better for the stairway. However, I will be changing stuff up in future videos and changing the layout of the stairs and possibly the design of the stairs, along with how it's going to connect to the floor framing. And I will also be providing you with some plumbing videos. So let's go ahead and zoom in on the header here where we have a double stud underneath this side. And of course, this one here is going over the wall. I have the beam connecting to this joist and to this joist. And I like to do that if I have enough length in the beam. And our stairs currently have an 11-inch step with no nosing. And this allows me to flush up the step in the landing. I can just run it straight through instead of offsetting it a little bit and then adding the nosing to it. And of course, our window for the stairwell along with our fire blocks. And these blocks will also help for the nailing of the floor trim. And this is actually what I thought they were used for when I first started building stairs, only to find out later that they were meant to be used as fire blocks to prevent oxygen and fire from going from one point to another point. And of course, I have the closet for storage going underneath the landing. And of course, I could install a beam here at the top and have the closet go all the way under the stairs if I wanted more storage. So here you can see where it's coming into this area here, but going no further there. And of course, our blocks and our support studs that are going to help to support the landing. And again, for those of you who might have missed it, this is the only 2x6 wall we're going to have in the building. However, you could always change your design to have 2x6 in the bathroom plumbing walls. Next up, let's go ahead and install our floor sheathing. And since everything is 16 inches on center, you can see it looks pretty good except for this point right here. And you might need to install blocks here in the sheathing and adjust the floor joist layout, or even add another joist if this needs to have a 2-inch minimum width here. And that could be the same over here. And again, I'll be going over that hopefully in future videos. Let's go ahead and install the upper framing. We have bedroom here, bedroom, office, and a bedroom. This does not have a closet. However, you could always install a closet. And the entrance into the office area or a den. And then our bathroom window is going to be a little smaller here. And we won't have a bathroom window downstairs because of the way the bathroom is going to be located in the building. Another window in the corner here of the upper floor. And then our door going into this bedroom, closet door here going into the closet. And we basically have the same situation over here. We're coming in here to the bedroom with a closet over here. Except we are going to have a little jog here in the framing. And we're going to need to make sure with this design that this is long enough. I've actually came to some houses where you couldn't open the door all the way because there wasn't enough foresight to figure that out, or somebody went ahead and installed a larger door. I don't know which it would have been. And of course the opening into the other bedroom, or the door into the other bedroom, and then a large closet. Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at our linen closet. And you could always make this a little shorter and make this closet a little longer by simply moving this wall here and not this one. So we would move this wall here and then not this one here. This one will need to be located about where it's at to allow for the door to open. And what I like about this design is that you come up the stairs and you don't have a large hallway or wasted hallway space. And you don't need to go very far out of the bedrooms to get to the bathroom. And the bathroom's also going to be a little bit closer for anyone who needs to come upstairs to use the bathroom because the lower bathroom might be occupied. And this should give you a pretty good idea why I positioned the windows like I did. We're not going to be able to go much lower before we hit the roof. And of course, you could always change the pitch of the garage roof. You can make it a little lower if you needed to lower the window sills. Next up, our garage roof. We're going to be using trusses, 24 inches on center. And we're going to have a 4-12 pitch on both the bottom and the top. Let's go ahead and install the fascia board for the garage. And since we're using 2x4 for our top cords in the trusses, we can use 2x6 for our fascia board. And of course our 2x4 lookouts here so that we can provide some cantilever support for the fascia board. And these are usually spaced 32 inches on center. And then, of course, our little roof extension here. Next up, let's go ahead and zoom over to the front of the garage and take a look at how the fascia board dies into the building here. And since we have about 21.5 feet for the fascia board, we're probably going to have to put a break in it. However, some areas actually do sell 22-foot fascia board if you don't want the break in it and it's available in your area. The main roof again, 4-12 roof pitch, with 2x6 fascia, 24-inch on center truss spacing, and of course our Gable roof truss. Remember, this sits on top of the framing plates, unlike the trusses on the inside of the house that might require a 1x4 for all of the walls that run perpendicular to it. And I went ahead and left mine at 2x4s because I've seen that lately. And you would need to check with a roof truss manufacturing company to verify whether or not this would need to be 3/4 of an inch instead of 1.5 inches. And I believe someone just asked me recently if they could install a lag screw or a screw from the bottom of the framing plates into the bottom of the truss or the lower cord. And that probably won't work if you're watching this video because the trusses need to be able to move up and down until all of the weight from the roofing materials, drywall, everything has put the bottom cord into its final position, or hopefully its final position. And of course, we're going to need a brace here along with our spacer boards. These boards will allow us to correctly position the bottom cords of the truss. If we didn't put those boards in, then we could have a problem with our trusses bowing or moving from one side to the other. And of course, all of our ceiling backing in here. And I get pretty creative with the backing. And I'm not about to suggest nobody does what I do. I just can't believe how many people don't do certain things that can make their job easier and make the building stronger. Next up, let's go ahead and install our roof sheathing. Take a tour of the building here and go ahead and wrap the video up. In this video, we will be taking a look at some plumbing fittings that you can use to hook sinks up that are going to be back to back. So a sink located in one bathroom and then a sink located directly on the other side in another bathroom. And before we do that, let's take a look at the standard SAN-T connection with a single pipe being used as the drain and a single pipe being used as a vent, and then a single pipe to hook the sink up or the fixture. And you can see here where the single pipe vent is going through the roof and then the drain is going to connect to the other drainage pipes in the house. And if I want to have the two sinks connecting to a single drain line and a single vent pipe, then you might be able to use what is often referred to as a fixture T. And even though I'm using the double sinks as an example, other fixtures can be connected to a double fixture T. And the difference between this fitting here and a double SAN-T is that it usually has enough curve to prevent the water from this side while it's draining to actually go to the other side. However, that might not be the case if you use a double sanitary T, especially if you're using this type of connection for toilets that are going to be throwing out a little more water, whereas in a sink or a bathtub, you might not have enough water to actually make it across. And even if it did, it's probably not going to be enough. I really don't see a big deal with using a double SAN-T for a bathroom sink. However, I do understand that something like this could be a big problem if you're trying to use a snake to clean out the sewer. If you could imagine removing this section of the sink so that you could get the snake through here and hope that it's going to go down, but in reality, it's probably going to go across. And almost every plumber has a story about the snake going into another room and creating problems for the bathroom on the other side of the wall. And another fitting you're probably not going to be able to use for a situation where you have two fixtures on each side will be a situation where you have a Y fitting like this, connecting to your sink with a 45-degree fitting. Your local building codes probably won't approve it because this could create a water siphoning action that could pull water out of the trap. How much water? Would it be enough to ever create a problem? Might depend upon the distance between the fixtures, the amount of water coming out of each one of those fixtures, and the diameter of the pipes connecting the fixtures together, with a single drain pipe and a single vent pipe. And of course, a setup you're probably never going to have a problem with will be to connect each sink to a separate drain line, which will connect eventually to a single drain line. And I've actually ran into situations before where certain cities only allowed this type of setup. And again, you're not going to have a problem if you need to run a snake through something like this, because it's not going to be going across a double fitting, even though I don't think you're ever going to have a problem if you use a double fixture fitting, because they're designed specifically for that purpose. And since we're using the double drains, we're going to need two vents or one vent for each fixture, and we can connect one of them into a single vent pipe as long as all of the pipe sizes are the correct diameter. And don't forget to turn the sanitary T upside down. And with this method here, we're not going to be able to come straight out of the wall at a 90-degree angle if each one of these sinks need to be positioned directly across from each other. And to fix this, all we need to do is rotate one of the fittings or both of the fittings just a little bit. And in this case here, I just went ahead and rotated this one a little bit. And most of the time, this won't be that big of a deal. I know I've made plenty of videos where I've rotated this fitting about 45 degrees and had complaints from people suggesting that the pipe has to come out at a 90-degree angle. However, in my designs, I'm choosing to eliminate as many bends or angles as I possibly can, and that's one way to do it. And the last thing I want to mention will be that if you can lower one of the drain lines or raise one, then you might be able to use this method here, with one sanitary T fitting above another sanitary T fitting, and again using the single drain line with a single vent. And to make something like this work with both of the sinks at the same level or positioned at the same height, then you're probably going to need an extender. And that's not that big of a deal. I've used plenty of them before because of customer design changes. And I might as well admit it, I've had to use them more times than I've wanted to because I didn't locate these stub outs at the right height. And if I've done my job right, you now have a better idea about what you might be able to do and might not be able to do if you're not going to check with your local building department to hook a set of double fixtures together that need to be located on the opposite sides. Here is a tip that you can use to lay out extremely accurate stair stringers, and I've been using it for years. So you can go with the common method of just setting the framing square on the lumber and positioning it where it needs to be, and then marking it, and then sliding it over to the next layout spot. But I'm here to tell you that if you do this, unless you line everything up accurately, and sometimes the rounded edges on the lumber can create problems for you. So I'm not saying you can't do it, especially if you're a meticulous person. However, I do have a better way that will be faster and more accurate. And that will be to use stair gauges and then run a line over to the other side. And most of the time, your framing square is going to be marked on the other side. I don't have this framing square marked because I rarely need to use the other side in an example. However, on my framing squares that I use to lay out stair stringers, and I laid out a lot of them, I just simply had a mark on the other side, and I made that mark with a sharp knife. I just simply cut a gouge in at 11 inches, 10.5 inches, and 10 inches. And instead of worrying about lining it up with the front edge of the lumber that is usually curved or difficult to line up, you just simply line this line up here with the line you just made, and then work your way down the stairway. So not too difficult. And if you have your stair gauges attached in the correct position, you're going to be shocked at how accurate this method can be for laying out a stair stringer. And I like to work right to left. However, if you want to work in the opposite direction, just simply install your little grooves on the other side of the framing square and then work your way in this direction. Here is the second video in our series for building an A-frame house, and this one is going to have 2x6 tongue and groove for the roof sheathing and the floor sheathing, and we're not going to have any fascia board on the side. So let's go ahead and zoom in on this, give you an idea of what the inside might look like. Again, we're going to have collar ties, and we're going to use beams for our roof rafters that are going to be spaced 4 foot on center. And this is the way I remember them building A-frames a long time ago. It would have 2x6 tongue and groove for the flooring and the roof rafters would sit on top of the floor beams or directly on top of the concrete footings, instead of sitting on top of a wall framing plate and the floor sheathing, as I showed you in the previous video. And since it's not going to look like this, let's just go ahead and remove some of this stuff and provide you with a view from above, where we are going to have 4x8 floor beams, and these beams will be spaced 48 inches on center, and we can do that as long as we're using the 2x6 tongue and groove floor sheathing. And something else you will need to do a little different will be to move the center footing back on both sides, unless you're going to be covering it up by building a deck or a landing at each end of the building. Next up, let's go ahead and add the roof rafters. And this design will have blocks in between the rafters and a beam underneath them. And the beam really isn't going to be a supporting beam. We really don't need a ridge beam for this design. However, we are going to add some support posts underneath the beam to make this building a little stronger. Now, a couple of you pointed out in the previous video that it would be difficult to assemble the ridge framing. And doing it this way might be a little easier because you could always figure out the length of each one of the roof rafters along with the floor beams and assemble everything together and then stand it up in one section, or assemble the two rafters together at the top and even install the collar tie if you need to on the floor and then stand that up into place if that will work better for you also. Now, if you need a little more information on that, let us know in the comment area and I will walk you through the entire process of how I might assemble something like this. And as you notice, we're going to have a couple of braces here. You're going to need to plumb up this section of the building and brace it off at the sides. We're not going to worry about this right now because we could always adjust that a little later. And you can always change the bottom design of the rafter if you want to add some fascia board. And you can see where the roof rafter beam is now sitting on top of the floor beam. Let's go ahead and take a look at the other side. And you can use whatever you want to here, nails, lag screws, and even other types of building hardware to assemble this, like a strap in the middle. And the strap might not be necessary, again, because of the way the building is designed. And I'll go into that in more detail if you need that in another video. And I think the most common method you're going to use will be to bolt this together. However, I won't be able to provide you with the types of bolts or the amount of bolts that you're going to need for your project. Let's go ahead and zoom in on the bracing here. We can simply nail a block to the rafter and then nail our bracing to that block. And you could always extend the blocks up a little bit like we've done here. Otherwise, you might need to shape the top of the brace. And then we're just using a stake that we've driven into the ground. And we can attach the stake to the brace with some screws or nails also. And I think what I would do in a situation like this would be to assemble one section to create a pattern I'm going to repeat to assemble the rest of the building. And this would allow me to double check the end here to make sure that the beams are going to be the correct length where the block will die into the corner here. And that will make a little more sense once we go through a little bit more of the video. And after we have the first section braced off, we can go ahead and install our next section. And to stabilize everything, we're just simply going to use a scrap of lumber or a long 1x4 or 2x4. And you can put one of these on both sides if that's going to work better for you. And we can simply use nails or screws to position the rafters in the correct location. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to grab the rafter and kind of shake it a little bit to make sure that it isn't going to fall down, because you can always install additional bracing. And this would be one of those situations where it's going to be better to install additional bracing before continuing on with the assembly if you're not 100% sure it's currently strong enough. And again, that might be a topic for another video. Let us know if you need more information on that also. So not too difficult. We're just simply going to continue on with our bracing and our rafters, one section at a time until we get to the end of the building. And then we're going to double check everything and make sure that this side is plumb also. And the bracing is going to need to be removed after you've installed the roof sheathing up to the point where this bracing will need to be removed. You don't need to remove it before you install the roof sheathing. Just remove it after you've installed the sheathing up from the bottom or from the top to where it's going to have to be removed before you can finish with the roof sheathing. Next up, let's go ahead and take a look at the floor blocking. You can see here where we have a row of 2x8 blocks centered on the beam going right down the middle. And you could always install 4x8 blocks there if you're looking for a little more support. And the reason why we need to have the beams stop at a particular point, maybe 1.5 inches from this point here. And we could always shape the end of the block here if we wanted to. And like I said, hopefully that makes a little more sense once you look at this section of the construction And we will need a block. I don't think you need to get crazy here. We don't need to use a lot of building hardware here. I think you can simply nail the block to the roof rafter. And don't forget, you're going to have a bolt or two coming through here, meaning that you're probably going to have to notch some holes out of the block here, or lower the bolts so you can use a 2x4 or even a 2x2 so that the bolts aren't in the way of your framing. After this, we are going to install our floor sheathing, again 2x6 tongue and groove, and you can shape the end of the block here so that you can get some nailing from the roof sheathing into the floor sheathing here. That would be a nice transfer. You're going to nail the floor sheathing into this block and then the roof sheathing into the floor sheathing, and that should make a nice transfer here. And in this example here, we are going to be notching a section of the floor sheathing to go around the rafter beams, and then cutting smaller pieces here to fit in between each rafter. And you're probably going to need to nail the floor with 16D nails, and make sure that the floor sheathing has at least a 4-foot break in between the joints or breaks of the sheathing. And you could always do 2 boards at a time. I chose not to do that here, but I will provide you with an example of that with the roof sheathing. And of course, a nice floor finish here around the rafter beams. And I would recommend leaving at least a 1/16 of an inch gap between the rafter beam and the floor sheathing right here. And let's go ahead and remove some of the sheathing here to provide you with an example of why we actually installed the blocks. Now, next up, you could either install the walls or the ridge beam along with the rafter blocking, or you could install the rafter blocking and the collar ties, and then use the collar ties for scaffolding. You can put some boards on top of the collar ties to assemble all of the ridge components instead of working off of a long ladder, if that makes sense. Let's go ahead and zoom in. We are going to have a beam here, blocking here. You might need 2 boards here if you can't find something tall enough. For example, if I need a 2x16 and the biggest board I can find in my town is a 2x10, then I'm going to have a block sitting on top of another block here, or use a taller ridge beam. Let's go ahead and remove the block to give you an idea of how the rafters are going to sit on top of the beam. And you don't need to use this beam. You can have the rafters connect to each other and then install blocks here, as long as you have the collar ties or the rafter ties to keep everything from spreading apart. Next up, we can install the walls, or we can install the roof sheathing. But I would suggest installing the walls if you're going to have a difficult time fastening the studs to the top plates. But again, that will be a decision I will leave up to you. And the wall framing could always go all the way up to the bottom of the roof sheathing, or the bottom plate could be even with the bottom of the roof rafter. Or you could install the wall framing underneath the roof beam. And if you need more information about that, let us know in the comment area. Next up, let's go ahead and install the collar ties. And again, I would like to bolt the collar ties to the roof rafters. And before we install our fascia board, let's go ahead and take a look at the front and the back of the building here. Back of the building. And then take another look at the upper roof framing here, just to provide you with another view that I might not have provided you with earlier on. And another method you might be able to use to install a post in the middle would be to add another collar tie, and then add a block to the center, something like this, where we can have a post fully supported by basically a double joist. And depending upon what your engineer says, you might not need a structural beam. And something like this will work just fine. Also, keep in mind that I'm not providing you with a lot of building hardware in this video. And if you need more information on that, feel free to let us know in the comment area. And at this end here, I went ahead and just simply installed the post on top of the same sized header I used in the previous example. However, you might consider installing a larger header and maybe even double trimmers underneath that header. Again, this will depend upon whether or not this is going to be considered a structural load-bearing beam, or as I'm using it in this video, as a decorative beam, something to make the top of the ceiling look a little nicer. And while editing the video, I realized that I said this board here, the one that's going to be used to position the rafters on the other side. When I said you could attach it to the other side, I meant this side over here. I did not mean the underside or the other side of the roof rafter. And you could always install more than one brace at different levels, especially when dealing with longer roof rafters. And this is what I meant by the double board spacing for the roof sheathing. We're going to have 2 boards on the same break, and then another 2 boards, and then another 2 boards. And you could use this method here for the floor sheathing. Probably not going to have a problem with it. And another example here of how you could finish off the ridge with the sheathing, depending upon whether or not the roofer is going to accept it or not. And we're going to add a spacer between the back of the fascia board and the front of the building. This will allow us to install siding or stucco underneath the fascia board. And for those of you who have been watching my videos for a long time, you've seen that plenty of times in previous videos. Next up, let's go ahead and install the fascia board, and that's going to look something like this. And if you wanted to install fascia board on the bottom, you would just simply reshape the bottom of the roof rafters to where it would be similar to the installation in the previous video. Here's a quick tip for anyone who is looking for extreme accuracy when building a set of stairs, and that will be to avoid using this part of the tape measure to create an accurate measurement. Instead, add an inch to the measurement. So I was trying to get a 5.5 inch measurement. Move it back an inch, go to 6.5 inches, and then go to the 1 inch mark on the tape measure to make your mark. And you can see here where we have 5.5 inches. However, if I go back here, you can see where the tape measure is a little bit off. It's almost a 1/16 of an inch off if I'm holding the edge of the tape, which is often loose, and loose for a couple of reasons. I'm not going to go into the details on that, the reasons why the edge of the tape measure or the tongue is going to be off a little bit. So again, just simply add an inch. You can add 1/4 of an inch or a 1/2 inch, but it's usually easier for me to add an inch and then go to the 1 inch mark on the tape measure. And I'll even use this method here when checking my treads and risers when setting up my framing square or for other measurements that I need to be within a 32nd of an inch of. In this video, I will show you how you can use the common rafters instead of the hip rafters that might be difficult for you to calculate the angle for when trying to frame a roof for a pentagon-shaped building or a building with 5 equal sides. So the first thing we want to do is find the center of the building and the center where the rafters are going to connect to each other. And that can be done by finding the middle of one side and then connecting it to the other side, the point here. And you're going to want to do that from at least 2 sides. So you can do it from either one of these sides. We're doing it from this side here to locate the center. So not too difficult, I hope. And instead of using this measurement here, we're going to use this measurement here and use common rafters instead of hip rafters. And you can see here where we have a 5-foot measurement for our hip rafters and a 4-foot and 9 16 inches for our common rafters. And that's going to look something like this. So we're going to come off of the center. We're going to center our rafters in these locations. And then we're going to calculate the length of a common rafter. Now I do have another video on that. I will put a link to that in the video description area instead of walking you through the process in this video here. Now I have the rafters sitting on top of the concrete slab. The rafters will be in the same position, sitting on top of the framed walls. And instead of showing the walls, I figured it would be better to use the measurements on the concrete slab to show you the position of the roof rafters. And again, the rafter here is located in the center. The center of the roof rafter will line up with the center line on this side of the building. And then we will go up to the top where we have a line coming through the center of the floor. So I just kind of drew a line from the center here straight up. This is a vertically plumb line, and it's coming up through the center of the rafter. And you're going to be able to find the center, this measurement here, by using the roof rafter calculation methods that I have in the other video. And I will also be providing you with an example of how we can calculate this particular rafter length for this particular project at the end of the video. Now, when it comes to making our cuts here, our cuts will be at a 36-degree angle. We have a 72-degree angle here, or should I say we have 5 72-degree angles. Half of that is 36 degrees, and that's going to be the angle here that you're going to be cutting so that all of the rafters connect at the top center as shown here. So let's go ahead and take a look at it from the top. Again, this is the center coming up, a level line off of the center. These measurements might not work if you do not have a perfectly shaped pentagon with all of the angles correctly positioned along with equal measurements around the perimeter of the building. And of course, this is what it would look like after you cut and installed your 5 roof rafters. And for those of you who are familiar with just simply measuring from this point to this point to calculate your hip rafter, then you won't need to watch the next video where I will be providing you with the methods for calculating the hip rafters and using the hip rafters instead of the common rafters as our starting point for those of you who want to use that method instead of this method here. And in the last section of the video, let's walk you through the method that you can use to calculate the length of the roof rafter. That's going to be from the center point here to the center point here. And hopefully this will make sense. We basically start with a triangle. This is the pitch of the roof or the angle of the roof. And even though it's on the ground there and the points don't line up with the top, if we simply raise this triangle to the top point here, we're going to end up with the exact measurement that we need and the angle of the roof. We're raising this the exact height that we're going to have from the top of our seat cut to the top of the roof rafter. And that would look something like this here. The measurement from here to here and not from down here. The measurement from the corner of the seat cut with a plumb line straight up, and hopefully that makes sense. And to figure out the length of the rafter that we need, we're going to start with converting this number to a decimal that would represent feet so that we can calculate the height here for our 5 and 12 roof pitch slope. So for every 12 inches, we're going to go up 5 inches vertically. So if we went 24 inches or 2 feet, we would be going up 10 inches. And if we go up 4 feet, we're going to go up 20 inches. You can see right here where this is 20¼ inches. However, even though I'm showing you a triangle here, you're not going to have this information. The only information you're going to have will be this number here, or the base measurement from our building foundation. So let's go ahead and convert this to a decimal in feet. And what I'm going to do here is just take 9 and divide it by 16. That's going to give me this number here. And then I'm going to divide this number by 12. That's going to give me this number here. And I'm not going to walk you through the whole process for converting these decimals because I have more information on this in the video I was referring to that I will have a link to in the video description box. So this decimal here represents 9/16 of an inch. I'm going to simply add 4 to it. 4 feet right here, 9/16. And since I have a 5 and 12 roof pitch, if you have a different roof pitch, you're going to enter that number here. I have a 5 and 12 roof pitch. I'm simply going to multiply this number times 5, and that's going to give me this number right here. And then I can either convert this number to feet, or I can convert this number to inches, and then use the Pythagorean theorem to calculate the hypotenuse of the triangle. So to convert this number to feet, I'm simply going to divide it by 12. That's going to give me 1.68. I'm going to use 1.686. So let me go ahead and clear that. 1.686. This number here is feet and inches. This number here will be the decimal for this one here, for feet and inches, as feet. So as long as I have my two decimals, I can square these so that we can use the Pythagorean theorem. So I'm going to use 2.842, and then I'm going to add that to this number squared, and that's going to be 4.046. And I'm simply multiplying this number by itself when I push this button. So I need to add these two numbers together. So 16.370, let's add that to 2.842, and that's going to be this. And then I'm going to get the square root of that number. 4.383 will be this number here as a decimal. So to figure this out in inches, I'm simply going to multiply this number times 12, and that's going to give me 52.59 inches, or just a little bit over 4 foot 4 and 9/16 of an inch. And that's how we calculate this number. Here is a video that could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars when building a new house and even remodeling an old one. And number one on the list is probably going to be the biggest problem, and that's going to be an unrealistic budget. This happens to everyone who has absolutely no idea what they're doing. And the solution to that would be to learn as much as you possibly can about construction. Next up would be using the cheapest contractor estimates you can find and low material estimates to create a budget. If you don't have realistic numbers, and again, this is going to be a bigger problem for someone who doesn't know much about construction. Next up would be square footage pricing. This has always been a joke to me, even though I've known plenty of contractors who use it because they don't know what they're doing. And to give you an idea of how that works, you might come across an estimate that suggests you can build a single-story home for $145 a square foot, when in reality you might be able to build one for $100 a square foot or $200 a square foot. Next up would be material price increases, where last year and the year before we saw prices almost quadruple. And I remember telling my uncle, who was a framing carpenter for almost 50 years, that an 8-foot 2x4 was almost $9, and he couldn't believe it. So I didn't bother to tell him that a half-inch sheet of OSB was selling for $64. And the weird part about this was that people were actually paying these prices. I couldn't believe it. So don't be surprised if prices increase or actually decrease while you're working on your project. And a solution to this would be to lock in as many prices as you possibly could, especially for large ticket items like the lumber you're going to use to frame your house. Number 3, change order costs. This usually happens when people find better items, and those items are usually more expensive, or through contractor suggestions. I worked with a contractor one time who racked up over 100 change orders while remodeling a 2-story building at an apartment complex. And the biggest problem with change orders is the fact that you can't actually visualize what it's going to look like until after it's built, and that's when you start changing things. For example, you might not like your flooring or change the cabinet layout in the kitchen. And I actually worked on a job one time with a budget of $400,000, and by the time we were done, the budget was over $625,000. So yes, when I'm talking about increases of $100,000, this would provide you with a good example of that. Number 4, time delays. Even though this might not be a big ticket item here like the rest of them, it's still something to consider. And time delays can be caused by a variety of different things. And if you have any scaffolding or tools or heavy equipment sitting on your property waiting to be used by you or the contractor, and you're paying a daily, weekly, or a monthly fee for this stuff, or it has to be on the property for an extra month or two because of things like material, labor, or building inspection delays, or unrealistic time management schedules, then you can see where this is going to add a little bit more to the cost of the project. Number 5 on our list, another biggie, hiring the wrong people. You've heard the horror stories before, and these people can create horror stories for you, the property owner, even though you think you have a signed contract that's going to prevent you from having any problems with these people or provide you with legal action if they don't perform like they suggested. And hiring the wrong people can lead to building inspection problems. For example, one time I cut a roof truss. The building inspector caught it, and the project was held up for over 30 days. And another one you should seriously consider, try to avoid hiring friends and family if they're not professionals or licensed contractors. Then there are the infamous no-show contractors. This kind of goes into number 4 on time delays. And of course, these are the contractors that will provide you with every excuse possible why they couldn't show up that day. And last on the list, we'll be hiring people who are going to work by the hour or a time and materials contract instead of a fixed price contract. And I realize it might sound like you're getting a better deal in the beginning. However, if you have workers that are not performing well, you could end up losing a lot of money with these individuals. So the best advice I could possibly give you would be to pay attention to all of these 5 items I mentioned in this video. In this video, I will be talking about problems that you might have if you have a low riser and longer stair treads. And I've seen a few of these where people are trying to connect the post to the stringer in a variety of different ways, including running all threads all the way across and blocking. And I've even seen this on one of the more popular home building channels. And I'm not about to suggest that it won't work if the risers are higher, even though I think it's going to be better to have another support post right behind it, like I have here. So if you have a riser that might be 7.5 inches, then you might not have a problem, or as big of a problem connecting the post to the stringer and then using all threads to connect through or blocking. But I would imagine most of you watching this video right now can see that this right here is going to be a little bit stronger, or in my opinion, a whole heck of a lot stronger than something like this that could actually, with enough pressure, split the bottom of the stair stringer. And I know what you're saying, hey, you're going to have a riser and a tread holding all this stuff together, or maybe some all threads. And that might work for this part of the stairway, but that does not mean that the bottom of the post will not split or break somehow. And this is the whole reason why I'm making the video, because I've came across a lot of this lately where the stringers aren't tall enough. And again, I'm going out of proportion here. I have a 14-inch long tread and a 4-inch riser. And if you're going to set a stringer with a 4-inch riser on top of 2x4 sill plates, then it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out we're not going to have a lot of room here. And in reality, something like this wouldn't really work unless we create a stronger connection a little further back, and then maybe use a larger handrail cap, like we have a 3x4 here, something that is going to act kind of like a cantilever in a floor, suggesting that these 2 boards right here will add to the lateral or side-to-side strength for our handrail. And another thing to consider would be adding another post or a few more posts something to increase the strength of the guard railing. And if it isn't too big of a problem, you could always cut a hole or dig a hole if you don't have a concrete surface like this, so that we can extend the bottom of the post down into a footing and use a rated piece of lumber, something that might be pressure treated and can be buried into the ground. And of course, we're going to pour some concrete around this to make this even stronger. And my last suggestion would be to use some type of structural metal that can be bolted to the guard railing post. And something like this might last a little longer, and in some cases provide you with a little more structural strength to make your local building inspector happy and create a stronger guard railing, or a guard railing that's actually going to do its job. Here is another video that might be helpful to do-it-yourselfers, and in this video I'm going to provide you with the most common bathroom design layout plan I've ever seen. And you're actually looking at it right here. We have a door, a sink, a toilet, and a bathtub. All of the plumbing will be on the same wall for the water supply, along with all the drains and vents. And the door is usually going to be located in this position, or it could be located in these positions here. So you can see here where we can flip the bathroom over using this design with the doors located in these 4 positions. And the same will hold true for the doors located in these positions here. Another thing to consider with this design will be the window locations. You can see where if we have an exterior wall here, we can put a window over here. And if we have an exterior wall behind the toilet, we could put a window here. And the most common window location will be behind the bathtub. And it will be a wider, skinnier window. It might actually be 4 foot wide and between 12 and 16 inches tall, depending upon the size of the bathtub and the ceiling height. And if you don't have an exterior wall around the perimeter of your bathroom, you can forget about the windows and install a ventilation fan. However, it's probably not going to be a good idea to have a larger window that's going to encroach into the area behind the sink, where you might want to install a mirror on the wall, or have a window that goes behind the door. And a few more things to consider would be to leave the toilet where it is. Don't move the toilet over here, because you could end up having problems with the door opening if you have a longer toilet. And how do I know? Because this is the setup I have in one of our bathrooms. But again, if this is what you want, just make sure that the door is going to open. Otherwise, you could always install a pocket door. Just keep in mind that if you do install a pocket door, you won't be able to put a medicine cabinet in this wall. This is another standard with the design. Medicine cabinet here, mirror here, toilet paper holder on the cabinet if you're going to have one. If not, it's going to have to go on the wall. And then a towel bar over here. And this example here might provide you with a better idea of how the door would be in the way if you had a toilet here. And I'm not about to suggest that the last thing I want to mention is that big of a deal, but if you do something like this and you have the door open towards the sink, then you're simply going to need to close the door before using the sink. One of the biggest problems you're going to have reusing old stair stringers will be the fact that the lumber shrinks. And I've seen a 2x12 shrink up to 3/8 of an inch before off of the width. And there's a high probability that that's what's going to happen to your existing stair stringers, especially if they're located outside. Inside stair stringers shrink also, and the cause of the shrinking is usually going to be from the moisture inside the lumber evaporating out of it. And this is going to cause a variety of irregularities depending upon the lumber. Now, if you have dry lumber, you're working with dry lumber, this might not be a problem. So I'm not about to suggest that something like this is going to happen all the time, but it does happen often enough for you to be aware of it. And again, it's the irregularities. It might not shrink over here. It's going to shrink here, not over here, not over here. And you might have a big knot over here that's causing the lumber to deform. And this could include twisting, warping, and curving the lumber. So you could be dealing with a stair stringer that would be curving up or one that would be curving down in the center. and is no longer straight. So let's just say you have a nice piece of lumber and it shrinks the exact same dimension all the way around the stair stringer. Again, another thing that's not going to be real common but possible. Then you might be able to reuse that one. But you're going to have to add some shims in a variety of different locations, including the top and the bottom. And that might look something like this, but again, this might not provide you with the best results. And if there are any irregularities, you're probably going to have to add shims. And by the time you finish doing all of this, you probably would have been better off just making a new stair stringer. And the main reason why most people aren't going to lay out a new stair stringer is because it's not that simple to do. I get it. Just make sure that before you use the old stair stringer as a pattern, that you measure each step. And that would be in this direction and in this direction all the way up, to make sure that you don't have any wacky variations in it that are going to create building code issues. You are allowed to have up to 3/8 of an inch maximum variation between steps, but I'm not going to go into that. I have another video on that at our website. And you can get to it by clicking on the Design tab and then the Building Code tab and then the Stair Building Code link to check out a variety of other building code issues you could have already with your existing stair stringer. So there you have it. I've never used an existing stair stringer as a pattern because of what I just said in the video. However, I also understand that I know how to make a new one, and I will leave it up to you as to whether or not you need to learn how to make one also. Here is another thing you can do when you are building stairs, and you would actually like them to turn out as nice as they possibly can. And that would be to stack your stair stringers on top of each other before they're installed so that you can check for any imperfections. And to do that, you're either going to line the back of it up, you're going to line the front of it up. Because if your imperfections are only about 1/16 of an inch, then I wouldn't even worry about it. What you're going to be looking for will be imperfections that are going to be a little bit larger. So here you can see where everything looks good, and you've done a good job cutting your stringers at the top. And again, if this was off just a little bit at either the bottom or the top, then you can probably let it go. However, if it's off quite a bit, then you're going to need to make some adjustments to it. Or at least I would recommend that you make some adjustments to it. And you can do that by adding shims or shaped strips of lumber like we did here. And I would recommend using some type of an adhesive along with some small nails or screws to attach the shim to the stringers. And I will be making a future video to show you what happens if you don't fix this before you install your stair stringers. So here we had some imperfections that needed to be filled, and we used shims to do that. However, you could end up with an imperfection like this that needs to be trimmed. And if that happens, just simply grab your saw and recut that part of the stringer, or use a planer or some type of a sanding device to trim the wood off. Now, I've also used belt sanders to flatten some of these imperfections out also. And the last thing I would like to suggest would be that if you have too many imperfections, then you might consider recutting the stair stringers.